This is an overview of the Canon 1000D digital camera. It was launched in June 2008, so it's been around for a couple of years now. But as it's classed as an entry-level camera, it's typically one of the cheapest ways to get into SLR photography. And here's the camera up close. First, it's worth pointing out that in Europe they call this the 1000D, as you can tell by the logo on the bottom right of the camera. In America they call it the Digital Rebel XS. Although essentially it is the same camera, the name just changes depending upon which part of the world you end up buying the camera from. It's a 10.1 megapixel camera and it weighs 502 grams. Now if you compare it to the weight of other cameras, that is pretty light, and that's down to two factors really. Firstly, it is slightly smaller than the alternative digital cameras you can get, and secondly it is a plastic body construction as opposed to a metal one. So that means it is lighter, but it also does feel a bit more fragile, and you probably want to be careful not to drop it. The camera itself has 7 focusing points, and if I turn it around you can see that it has a 2.5-inch LCD screen on the back, and turning it around further still you have a compartment on the side, and you can see that it takes SD cards as memory. Going into more detail about the various buttons and functions on the camera. So at the front you've got your shutter release button. Right behind that you have got a slider wheel. You'd use that for changing things like your aperture size, your shutter speed for example. There's a very well positioned ISO button directly behind that. Basically that means that you can actually change your ISO levels on the fly whilst you're looking through the viewfinder, which I find saves quite a lot of time. You'll notice that on the top of the 1000D there actually isn't a little LCD screen or anything like that. You generally get that on the higher models, but on this one obviously you don't get one. Standard menu selector wheel at the top here to go between your various modes. You can change your what focusing element you wish to use with this button in conjunction with the slider wheel at the front. Again, that's very easy to use whilst you're looking through the viewfinder. On the back of the camera itself you've got a 2.5-inch LCD screen for reviewing your pictures, which is a pretty decent size. Standard buttons for changing things like your exposure levels, your white balance. To change the white balance you have to use the cursors at the bottom of the camera rather than the actual slider wheel at the top. Delete your pictures at the bottom, re-review your pictures with that button there. There's the menu button on the side, so that brings up the various different settings so you can adjust your camera. On the side here you have the panel, which if you flip it back you can then connect the camera to external devices such as your TV or your computer for example. At the top of the camera you've got your flash release button. The flash is actually hidden within this little compartment at the top, and then on the side you've got your lens release button here. Now to show you some example photos taken with the Canon 1000D, I've got a couple here. They were taken at a local park. The first few images here were taken with a Canon EF 50-200mm lens. So typically I'm pretty happy with these pictures. There's no detectable grain at all, ISO level of about 200 used, and the pictures are pretty sharp and clear. One thing it's worth pointing out though, myself personally, I like taking pictures and play around with the white balance settings on the same scene to get different effects, and you can't really do that all that easily on the 1000D whilst looking through the viewfinder. That's because the settings appear on the LCD screen at the back. So that's one slight fiddly thing worth pointing out. But as you can see, here's a picture here which has an automatic white balance setting, and then again here's the same scene but with the white balance set to shade instead, so you get a slightly warmer feel to the picture. Okay, so here are some pictures now taken with a Sigma 70-300mm lens, so that's more of a telephoto lens. So you can see a couple of example pictures here, and here's another picture taken with this lens in macro mode, so you can see an example of a macro photo taken with it. And finally I've got a couple of pictures taken with a Canon 15mm fisheye lens, and here's a couple of samples now. So in terms of where the Canon 1000D fits into the line of SLR photography, it comes in pretty much at the bottom. It's an entry-level camera, so it's typically going to be more basic than some of the higher range cameras, but also means it's going to be pretty cheap. There is a newer version, which is the 1100D, which came out recently, and the 1100D has slightly higher megapixels. It's 12 megapixels as opposed to the 1000D, which has 10, and it also has 9 focusing elements as opposed to 7. But then again, it's going to be a bit more expensive. Above the entry-level cameras, you've got the mid-range ones. So currently that's going to be the Canon 600D. That's higher megapixels again, up to I think it's around about 17, and it's also going to have higher ISO range and various other enhanced abilities, but then again it's going to be more expensive. And then above that still, you're going to have the prosumer level, and the prosumer level currently is going to be the 60D, and that's typically got a superior build quality to the lower range cameras, but in terms of actual image quality they can often be quite similar. In terms of price, the Canon 1000D costs about £300 brand new. Now if you're to buy it second hand or refurbished, that will bring the price down to probably between £200 and £300. The latest version, which is the 1100D, is slightly more expensive, and that costs about £350. Now, another option would be to get, say, a second-hand prosumer level camera, so that's a higher build quality, better image quality, and you could pick up something like the Canon 40D, for example, which is a few years old, but you could probably pick that up for between, say, £250 to £400. So in conclusion, I think the Canon 1000D is very simple to use. I think the buttons have been very well thought out with this camera. It's very easy to do things like to change the ISO level, change the focusing elements, for example. The white balance button here I find a bit frustrating to use because it means you've got to look through the LCD screen to change the white balance. I mean, some people might not do that very often, so you know it might not apply to everyone, but it was something I personally found a bit frustrating. The camera itself is very small, light and easy to carry around, which is great. But remember, it is a plastic body construction, so it probably won't stand up to too many drops. Now if you've got a budget of around about £300, you want to get a new camera and you're new to SLR photography, then I think this is a great option to go for. If however you've been doing photography for a while and you're prepared to take a risk, I would probably recommend trying to get something like the a slightly older prosumer level camera, so something like the Canon 40D, and then have the benefits of its greater capabilities and better, superior build quality. There we are. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of the Canon 1000D, and if you'd like to check out some more reviews you can go to my YouTube channel, which is SLR Lens. Thanks.